Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This evening's presentation is going to cover replacement heifer identification, provided by Marcy Ward of New Mexico State University Extension. Our presentation for the evening, provided by New Mexico State University's Extension Livestock Specialist, Marcy Ward, and the presentation is going to be on replacement heifer selection. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen over to you, Marcy, and thank you again for providing the presentation for us again, and looking forward to it this evening.
Okay, well, I want to thank the group again for the invitation to speak to everyone tonight. And if you catch this later, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll leave that at the end of the presentation. So the topic of discussion tonight is heifer replacement, and I'm going to cover raising your own versus purchasing, and then whether you do either, the criteria you should put together when selecting these replacements. It's a very important management decision. And then you want to set these young heifers up for success, and that includes nutrition and then setting a plan for reproductive management. So we'll go through all that. So good cows come from good cows, right? And the majority of people keep replacements out of their own herd. That said, this is still, like I said, a very important decision. You just don't want to do a gate cut. When a heifer comes through, you're going to keep her. You want to really take your time and get the absolute best ones. And if you're keeping good records, you'll know which heifers are coming out of your better cows. So in most management situations, there's usually about a 15% retention rate. It depends on a couple things, of course. First and foremost, your open cows need to go to town and they need to be replaced. So however many cows come up open when you do pregnancy checking, typically in the fall, you'll want to equally keep back as many female heifers. So the other thing to think about is forage availability. We're sort of in a shift, I think, not statewide necessarily, but certainly in certain locations. You'd mentioned you guys have been getting some rain, thankfully. We have as well. And so in certain parts, regions of New Mexico and Arizona, we are seeing some regrowth of forage after some people might have destocked a bit because of drought. And so there might be an opportunity to keep back more heifers than normal, not just the open that leave for being not pregnant, but also if you're wanting to kind of get your numbers back to where they were. And I really like the idea of starting to look at these females in the branding pen, meaning when they're about 3 months old, they really tend to stick out the most in those older heifers that were born early in the calving season. That's pretty obvious in the branding pen. And there's and I'll speak to that a little bit as well, but all of this doesn't really work unless you're taking really good notes, keeping good records, and going back to those records to make these decisions. So why do I say look at those older heifers? Well, research has shown and experience can tell you that those older heifers are older at breeding. So they've likely already cycled at least once prior to turnout with the bull, or if you're doing artificial insemination. And we know that if they've had at least one cycle before being exposed to a bull for breeding, they have a better chance of getting bred by your breeding season. Also, these older heifers are telling you they're out of cows that breed early as well. So if they are older and born early in the calving season, they're out of cows that bred early that are demonstrating good fertility. Now, the next thing, so what you could do in the branding pen is find those older heifers. They're going to be obviously bigger than the younger heifers that were born later in your calving season, and just put a different colored tag in them so they're easily to identify come weaning. And then at weaning, you're going to want to give them a second look, right? And knowing that you may not keep all of them or need to keep all of them, you can now start to get a little more picky in your selection process. So what would you look for? So did she maintain that growth rate from when she was about 3 or 4 months old? And her health, has that been good since branding? If you do know who she's out of, is her dam early bred again, meaning she's, was bred early in the breeding season this year? So is she pregnant? And then the next thing is structure and disposition. Both of these are very heritable, and whether it be mammary, your bag, is the cow have, not the best bag in the world? That can be heritable. Does she got crooked legs? Anything like that. And then certainly disposition is highly heritable as well, and not necessarily a benefit if she is always aggressive or always high strung in the working neck shoots. So again, to make these decisions, you need those records. So sometimes the question comes up, should I keep heifers out of heifers, right? And so there's a couple rules of thought. Most people do not like to keep heifers out of first calf heifers. That said, if you have good records on her pedigree, seed stock people will do this occasionally, the purebred breeders, because they know the genetics of these heifers, and if they're superior, they want to propagate that. But the downside is she hasn't really proven herself yet. You don't know what she's actually going to do for you in terms of production. But if she bred early, that's a good indication of her fertility. So it's sort of a guessing game a little bit. If you want to keep females out of first calf heifers, but keep in mind that you don't have a lot of backstory on that, what she can do for you yet. So there's advantages and disadvantages to raising your own. Certainly the advantages, in my mind, by far the best advantage is those animals are raised in your environment, and that's absolutely key for heifers to be able to breed and stay in the herd long term. And then their health history, their genetics, and it can be more cost effective depending on what the heifer market is doing at the time. Back in 2015, heifers just got priced out of their worth and put a lot of people upside down on ever those heifers paying for themselves. So be careful of that if purchasing. So from that standpoint, can be more cost effective. But the other side of that is the disadvantages of slow genetic progress. If you're not really incorporating new and different genetics for different purposes, you're not really going to change much in terms of weaning weights, muscle score in your calves, profitability, that kind of thing. So that is one limitation to raising your own heifers. With buying replacement, it gives you a few more options, commercial or purebred. So again, there's going to be some price point differences between those two to start with. Commercial might offer some hybrid vigor. Purebred can give you some flexibility in your genetics. So you can buy them at weaning at a lower price. Again, this is a little more challenging to do because you don't know what these heifers are going to do in 6 months from now or a year from now. They're going to be on your utilizing your resources longer, and your return on investment is going to take a little longer because then you're now investing another 1.5 years before she produces a calf. The benefit of a weaned buying at weaning is they have more time to adapt to your environment, And so it would be effectively like raising your own, but with maybe slightly different genetics. You can also buy them at yearling. A lot of people like to do this in the spring because then they have control over how they're going to breed these yearling heifers and keep them within their program. It is slightly more expensive, but again, you're going to save 6 months of input costs. And then something to think about, though, for this yearling is it really needs some special management to make sure you're setting her up for success. And we'll talk about why that is here in a bit. And then you can always buy bred heifers, typically in the fall. You are going to pay a little more for these heifers. However, you're going to get a quick return on investment, meaning she hopefully has a good and healthy calf, no trouble, within 3 or 4 months after you buy her. The downside of that is you don't know what she's bred to unless that information is available. And so that first calf out of these bred heifers can be a little bit of a crapshoot. So you'd want as much information as possible if buying a bred heifer. So more information is absolutely power in making this very important decision, and you are making an investment decision. And so you want to see if you can have access to health history. What kind of shots have they had? Has there been any sickness? Again, evaluate these purchased animals as you would your own for structure and disposition. Hopefully they come with some actual performance data. And if you're buying a purebred animal, they should, of course, come with genetic information like EPDs and even genetic testing to give you a better idea of what this heifer is going to be like. And then if she's bred, is there any information on her sire? And this is really important for calving ease purposes as it relates to heifers. You want a sire that's low birth weight, high calving ease, so she doesn't have any trouble in her first calving. If you're going to go to a production sale for females, hopefully they have some history of the dams. A lot of people like to, even when they sell, I oversee the tooth and carry bull test. And when producers are marketing their bulls, they'll often show pictures of the dams they're out of, because buyers of these cattle want to know what these offspring are coming out of in terms of the dam. So, because that's just as important as the sire. So if you know her history, that's certainly helpful. Structure disposition assessment can happen at that time too. And again, just like with raising your own, records are important here to take notes and see if they're going to meet and fit your production goals. So the advantage of buying replacements, rapid genetic improvement, particularly if you go the purebred route, you're going to get a little better assessment of production based on their genetic information, quicker return on investment if you buy a bred heifer. And then it provides some herd management flexibility, meaning if you're in a situation that maybe you sold some heifer or you oversold in the fall because you didn't know what your forage was going to do, you got some rains and you wanted to add back in, this is one way to do that. Disadvantages, of course, is the timing you buy these animals and their ability to adapt to your environment. And then purchased heifers may require more management, particularly at the breeding season on your yearling heifers that you buy. And when you combine all this, it is a market-driven part of it, and so they can be more expensive. It just depends on what the market is doing at the time. So when you're out to purchase predominantly, the big key is, does she fit, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about adaptability as it relates to that. But this too could maybe help you if you're in a situation that you can sell heifers as well. So crossbreds tend to be a little more adaptable than the purebreds. It just, and I put a hash mark on the purebred. It depends on what breed you're talking about, on how adaptable they can be. But typically crossbreds are fairly adaptable in about any situation. English is the Angus, the Herefords, Shorthorns, these type of cattle tend to be more adaptable than the Brahman crosses or Brahman influenced cattle or Continentals like your Limousine or your Charolais. The reason that the Brahman cross are not as adaptable are mainly when you get them in colder environments. They just don't grow the hair coat. They don't have the thick enough hide to handle those cold extremes. Continentals, on the other side, carry a lot of muscle, and they can have some issues in extremely hot, sparse environments. So when you're looking at maybe purchasing heifers, think outside the box, see what you can do to really grow your bottom line and improve productivity of your herd. So in terms of climate adaptability, obviously, if they come from an arid place and you're in an arid location, that's a pretty easy fit. If they come from a humid location, say South Central Texas, and they come to an arid location, they're going to adapt to that just fine. Where you see animals tend to fall apart is if an animal raised in the arid regions go to a humid region, because that heat index just really they have a hard time with that. Cattle are fairly can be heat intolerant. It just depends on the breed. Altitude, again, avoiding extremes. If they came from South Florida, you don't want to take them up into the mountains. And then also genetics can bear that as well. That there does seem to be a magic number of about a 6,000 feet elevation. You want to avoid the swings of that too much, or you can run into some brisket or respiratory disorders. And then the genetic side of that, we're finding some lines of cattle that are more likely to get altitude or brisket disease, as there's some genetic links to that in high altitudes. So again, when you're looking at bringing heifers in, make sure that it makes sense that these are moderate cattle. They're not the big framey cattle, taking them to something that like this down here where it's very sparse vegetation. Make sure that it all makes sense. I've heard numerous horror stories of people buying really pretty cattle, really good cattle from, say, even Oklahoma, which doesn't seem all that far away, and they come to New Mexico and they just fall apart. They just can't handle having to travel so much to feed. So again, just avoid extremes, crazy genetics, big swings in climate from location to location, big swings in altitude. And then hopefully you can match these animals to what you have for resources. And previous nutrition, I'm going to get into that, is very important as well. So selection criteria, we like this heifer. She's very pretty, attractive, little Simmental cross looks to be like. And so a lot of eye appeal, but is she functional in Western New Mexico? Probably not. But there are some key things to think about when you're selecting your heifers, whether it be out of your own herd or purchasing. You know, they do need to have a certain feminine look about them, as there is some correlation. That's not huge, but there is some correlation between femininity of the female and fertility. And so that is something to consider. You want moderate frame. You don't, a big framed animal is going to make big cows. So keep that in mind. And sort of big offspring. And so you need her to be able to maintain herself easily without having to feed her a lot. So you want a moderate frame. The frame scores can be anywhere from a 1 to 9. I've never seen a 1 or a 2. I've seen a few 3s, real small cattle. Never seen a 9. So 5 is moderate, and that's kind of what you're shooting for. Structure is highly heritable, like I said. So you want to establish that these cows have, or these heifers replacements have really good feet and legs under them. Appropriate angles, hips, of shoulders. I'm going to show you examples of these, and then the importance of body condition as well. Okay. All right. So this is just a couple examples of feminine versus not feminine. You can see this, even though there's obvious weight differences between these two heifers and age likely. You can see the heifer on the left is long fronted, really small dishy face, clean inner shoulder, and just an attractive young heifer. This heifer is very coarse. A lot of it is fat cover, so that hides some of it. But the big giveaway of her lack of femininity, in my mind, is her head is very coarse, and if you were to see her from a distance, you wouldn't necessarily think her as a heifer. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't want too fine a bone, in my opinion, but you certainly don't want something that looks like a beef steer. Structural correctness is important, and the main reason is you want your animals to last, whether it be bulls or cows, and structure can certainly dictate how long they stay in the herd. They can break down on you if structure is not appropriate to your environment. And so we have examples here, though pretty rudimentary, of a post-legged animal, a sickle-hocked animal where they really camp under themselves versus one that's more correct. And then here's more of a visual of that, showing a nice correct leg versus a cow-hocked leg. I don't mind cow-hocked animals too much. I don't mind a little angle in their skeleton because they need that in rough terrain, but you can go too far, too straight a shoulder, too post-legged. Those are just kind of asking for longevity problems. The next big thing would be the feet. The Angus Association actually has a foot score now as an EPD that you can look at. But certainly just putting your eyes on these females to see do they have a nice square foot? Is it laying straight on the ground? Make sure the toes are even. These are the things you want to look for when you're selecting your replacements. But from a productivity standpoint, even more important is the hip set in my mind. And this goes to the reason you hear, say, judging terms, she was even from hooks to pins. The reason that's desirable, okay, in this case, this one has a bit of an angle where this one's very straight. It has to do with calving ease. So I wish I was in person with you guys so I could demonstrate this. I couldn't find visuals to show this very well. But when an animal has a tilted pelvis like this, it makes it more narrow for that calf to pass through, where here in a flatter surface, it's easier for that calf to pass through. Even though the width of the pelvis might be similar between these cows, the angle can dictate calving ease for that first calf heifer. So hip angle to me is fairly important when evaluating heifers and having no calving trouble. The next big thing to think about is udder quality. We know, if a cow gets a bad bag, that needs to be a criteria for culling. It's highly heritable. In fact, the Hereford Association has udder scores as part of their EPD program. And you can see clearly the difference between these two bags and the challenges you're going to have with a calf latching onto this or the cow getting mastitis, just a whole host of issues. Looks like she's gotten some sunburn, which that's a challenge for Herefords, or can be. And so udder quality is something, and again, you need to know the cow that she came out of. Hard to tell when she's a heifer, obviously. But if you know the cow and you know that the cow's got a good bag under her, that's another good sign that this would be a good heifer maybe to keep. So I'm switching gears a little bit to talk about nutrition, because without nutrition, you don't have good reproduction and health and longevity in your cow herd. And so it's the number one driver of maximizing reproduction. And here's why. So for a mature cow, all she wants to do is chew her cud and hang out. And so that's her priority, is just to keep blood flowing, lungs pumping, ruminating, and all that. The next thing for our heifers to deal with is growth. So that they have an added requirement over a mature cow just for the fact that they are growing. And then something to keep in mind too, that after that first calf, she also now has to support milk production and reproduction. So these young cows, the reason they fall out of the herd because they become open that next year is we're not checking these previous boxes adequately in terms of nutrition, okay? So one way to ensure that we can get her through that first calving and get her rebred, because that is an expensive investment, minimum of 2 years if you raise your own, is the body condition of your heifers at breeding and at calving. You really want to keep a little bit extra flesh on those heifers. Out of a scale of 1 to 9, 6 is actually ideal for your young females. However, if you're getting by on a body condition 4 in your herd, then maybe a body condition 5 will work on your heifers. But to edge on the side of caution, that body condition 6 on those heifers is really recommended. Now, they don't need to weigh 800-900 pounds at breeding. It's just a matter of what your genetics you have and the frame that they carry on how hard or how much feed it would take to get that body condition to where it is. Okay. So when you monitor your cows, you would want to do it prior to calving and at weaning. Now with young heifers, we aren't doing either of those things. So you'll want to monitor body condition at breeding. Prior to breeding actually is what I would recommend, to make sure that they are ready for the breeding season in that first year. And then as she's approaching her first calving season, you really want to make sure she's got some extra help to get her through that. So this just shows what forage can do in the course of a year in terms of quality as it relates to meeting a heifer's nutrient requirements, right? So what happens is the change of nutrition, and when that change happens, it can become problematic, okay? So here is what she needs for energy. And you can see we have what I call an energy gap. Grass alone simply does not make up the difference she needs. The previous slide was for protein. A little added protein can go a long way for these heifers. However, energy density is where she needs maybe a little help. And for several years in the 90s, it was very popular to send heifers off to a feedlot and do backgrounding on those heifers, or heifer development as those yards would be called. And so what you saw was a really high plane of nutrition. You'd get that extra body weight that you wanted, and they would get nice and fat on these higher grain rations. Well, then you would bring them home and they would have a bigger drop in what they're exposed to at the ranch, if that makes sense. So if you go from a really high plane of nutrition to a low plane of nutrition, that heifer is thinking, I need to take care of myself. I'm not going to worry myself about getting pregnant or staying pregnant. And so So I caution people to really push these heifers just to get them fat. Ideally, you do want to supplement for moderate gains and appropriate gains. So when she does get pulled away from the feed bunk, it's not going to be such a drop that her system's going to give up reproduction. I hope that made sense. So the timing of change of nutrition is critical. You want to avoid making that change at breeding, or at least, and then within the first 45 days after being exposed to the bulls, because she would be willing to give up those pregnancies if the nutrition is not there. So the other thing is, if she loses an early pregnancy, but she does go ahead and breed maybe a month or 2 months later, she's already setting herself up to have lighter calves later, and then she's behind the 8 ball right out of the gate. And so we want to avoid that. So you really don't want to see heifers losing condition either in that last trimester of their first season, well, cows too, because it will affect their ability to rebreed in that second breeding season. You tend to have weaker calves and increased calving problems if you lose any condition during that time. So the goal is to maintain from a year of age to 2 years old, when she gets that first calf on the ground and beyond, at least a body condition of 5 and 6 to get her to that second breeding season, get her through that successfully. So let's talk a little bit about reproductive management of these heifers. You want, like I said, want to set them up for success by selecting those older heifers that have already cycled before being turned out with the bull, and support that growth with adequate nutrition, not necessarily overnutrition, but you do want to keep them on that growth curve that's appropriate for them, to help also improve fertility as well. I like the idea of incorporating, and if you haven't already, incorporating AI in your heifer management protocol, simply due to the fact you really have more control over calf size for her, and you can pick genetics that can also improve the herd as well. The challenge, obviously, with the drawbacks of AI is you do require some training to learn how to acquire that skill. And then there's some additional management to synchronize their estrus cycles to do that as well. However, to me, the benefits of bringing in a technology such as this on your heifers far outweigh the challenges. The other thing that to think about, and some people don't like this idea, or they don't have the pastures, logistics, whatever, to do this, and that's fine. But implement a very strict breeding season on your heifers, anywhere from 60 to at the most 75 days, and then pull the bulls from them. And why I say to do that on your heifers versus your cows is the cream of the crop will come to the top, meaning those that are truly fertile, which should have no trouble breeding early in that season and stay bred. And they will kind of shine as the ones you want to keep in your herd. And then if you do incorporate something like this where you're pulling bulls, you can go ahead and test for pregnancy early with multiple. We have blood tests now that will do it. Ultrasound certainly can pick up a pregnancy as early as 20 days. However, for risk of stress and all that, most people won't ultrasound until they're 45 days along. So other things that affect reproduction, again, age, those 3-year-old cows that were heifers, it's the heifer management that those 3-year-olds tend to fall out early in their career. And it all has to do with how they were managed as heifers. Again, I can't stress body condition enough, maintaining that 5 or 6 out of a scale of 1 to 9. You can be too little, but you can also be too much. If you get your heifers too fat, they will deposit that fat into their mammary tissue, and that's a permanent situation where their milk production abilities go down if they get too fat. So it's a very important balance for moderation. You want to know that if you have calving problems, if you haven't really controlled the type of bulls that your heifers are exposed to, that's just asking for them not to return to the herd that next year. There's a very strong correlation between heifers having calving problems and breeding in that next year. Are you dealing with disease? A short breeding season can maybe isolate that as a problem. Is it the bull? Hopefully you're doing breed soundness tests on the bull prior to turnout to make sure he's fertile as well. So just to kind of dive a little deeper into why I think implementing a strict 70-day, 60 to 75-day breeding season on your heifers, again, you really can find the ones that are fertile. When I had cows, I would AI them, and the heifers that stuck AI were the ones that I kept. I'd breed all my heifers. I didn't have a lot to do. I had like 30, but I bred all my heifers, and any that came up open that were not AI bred, unless they were out of really good cows, they went to town and they held their market value because they're still yearlings. So they still can go to the feeding industry, and you can still earn income off of those heifers with an early pregnancy test to determine that. Something that you might not have heard of, but is in AI programs and research and some other things that's proven to be very helpful, is doing reproductive tract scoring in heifers. And it's effectively a fertility test for heifers. So what this does is it simply determines the breeding readiness of your yearlings. And what this test will show you is, has she cycled already? Because like I said, in those older heifers, hopefully they've cycled before they are turned in with the bull. They can do pelvis dimensions, which that's also helpful for you in terms of anticipating any calving issues. And then the reproductive tract as a whole, what the health of that organ is, and the structures that are on that organ, like in the ovaries, how good are shape they in, and that kind of thing. And where it's really important is if you do have an AI program, you want to make sure, because not all heifers have hit puberty at the time of AI, and this will tell you if they have. Okay. And so for the heifers that don't hit puberty at the time you're wanting to breed them, whether it's AI or natural service, they're not going to, in that first 25, 28, 30 days, they may not breed. So this can help answer some of those questions. So to do the ultrasound evaluation does need special training in that they have to know the size of the ovaries and of the reproductive tract. But you can buy this at any veterinary supply store. This is a pelvometer. And you can at least do pelvic measuring in your heifers. There is some correlation with pelvic measuring and breeding readiness as well. So the scores itself is 1 to 5, with 1 being not ready at all to breed, and 5 being have already cycled. Okay, and so size of the animal doesn't always dictate where she's going to fall on this score card. I've seen very, 800-pound heifers still not reaching puberty for whatever reason. And even though they look great, big pretties, they're not ready to be bred. And so you hold off a month or so to breed them. And then I've seen lighter heifers score very well. So animal size alone doesn't necessarily dictate how ready they are for breeding. So selecting from your home herd or purchasing replacements, that's the ultimate question you have. Again, most people like to select from their own herd. But if you do, you want to identify those older heifers early on, the ones that are easy to kind of find in the branding pen. Evaluate the dam that those heifers are out of, if at all possible. I know that's not always able to do that, but you can look at the structure of the dam and her disposition, but then also look at that heifer. Even though she's young, she'll start to show some structure flaws if she has them. Set young heifers up for success with good nutrition and management. Again, you don't want to push them too hard with a lot of grain, get them too fat, and then turn them out on grass and expect them to breed. That big swing in nutrition will tell them to not breed based on what their priorities are. So you want to do a nice steady gain to hit a target that kind of fits your herd. And then maintain that as best you can, and by monitoring their body condition. When you're setting up your breeding program for your yearlings, whether purchased or owned, find those low birth weight bulls, those calving ease bulls, or breeds that are known for low birth weight to reduce calving problems. If you've made that decision that you don't plan on keeping any offspring out of your heifer crop, then you can find bulls, certain breeds like Longhorn or Wagyu cattle can typically throw very light calves, or, finding a good low birth weight Angus bull. Those kind of things will have a better success for their first calving season, offer better success. So really setting a breeding season for cows and heifers both is really important for managing your calf crop quality, watching disease, making sure that the cows are keeping up fertility wise, but also scrutinize those heifers for fertility, because fertility is very difficult to improve in a herd. It's a very slow process, but really scrutinizing those heifers that breed late. They still hold their value. So you can go ahead and market those heifers that are breeding late on you, because they're just going to continue to drag the herd behind in terms of calf quality. And so they don't really need to stay in your herd. Preg checking early by doing so can really help find these animals and isolate who's going to work well for you. And the best way to do that is records, right? So you really have to be diligent. Again, this is a big investment. You don't want to just do a female gate cut heifer, goes into the heifer pen and all that, and then maybe you take a look at them and see who you like. But having some more information on the dams in particular can be very helpful. So with that, I appreciate your time. Again, this is my email down here. This is my phone. If you have questions from tonight's presentation, please don't hesitate to ask, or I can take some here. I don't know if we've got folks logged on, but be glad to take any at this time.
Okay, thank you, Marcy, for your presentation. Very informative, and I learned a few things. But I do have a question for you. With the replacement heifers, I know we have a couple that have a hard time. Well, they take a little time to grow, but they do end up getting bred back. They throw calf, but it seems like they don't grow afterwards. It takes them, maybe a year to finally start showing some growth, new growth, if that's even a thing. What do you do with those heifers?
So they're kind of, if I understand your question, It's the heifers that sort of back off on their growing once they've calved.
Yeah.
Okay, so what they're doing is they're still designed to grow because they're on that growth curve of up until almost 5 years old, depending on the breed, but they'll still have a little bit of a growth requirement. Now, once they've calved, they're starting to pull their resources to the milk, and the rate of growth will slow quite a little just because, they're trying to support a calf. And so that's typically why it's really hard to physically feed them enough without costing too much to get them to keep that growth rate going and milk and breed, right? So what they've done is they've shifted where their nutrition is going. And so that's not totally unusual.
Right. Okay. And then as far as nutrition, I know you provided a presentation last year on it, but what is the ideal, to feed them when you're dry lotting them? There's alfalfa, but that can get pretty expensive in a hurry. Aside from alfalfa, what else can you feed them? You have grass hay, which nowadays is pretty much the same price as alfalfa.
Right.
As far as grain, what's suitable? What complements forage and the feed?
So, to your point that alfalfa and grass hay are now very similar in cost, if they're really close, I would maybe opt for alfalfa just because it's a lot more nutrient dense. It's higher protein, higher energy. And then just a alfalfa corn mix works pretty good. Really, for a moderate growth, so you're not getting them too fat, maybe 2 to 3 pounds of corn with the balance, say 10 to 15 pounds of alfalfa, something like that. You could also do a 50-50 blend of grass and alfalfa if the grass is a little cheaper. But the alfalfa would offer those younger heifers a good source of protein that would really benefit them in maintaining their growth rate without getting too heavy. I wouldn't feed a lot of grain, to just kind of watch that growth rate. And when I say growth rate, again, it depends on the frame size of those heifers, but a good steady growth rate is like 1 3/4 to 2 pounds a day, maybe 2 1/4 at the most. You really don't want to see a big 3 pounds of gain a day. As nice as that sounds, in the long run, it's not all that beneficial, and it's expensive to get that done.
That's a good point. And then also, with some of the replacement heifers, they get bred for their first time. They throw a calf, but their calf is small, and they do have a hard time growing. What do you do in that situation? Do you just ship them off as a pair and, move on from it? Or you try to, like you said, control the genetics? How would you approach that scenario?
Well, it kind of depends on the situation and what she was bred to, and her size, right? You don't want to put her in a situation of calving problems, but I'm personally of the philosophy that you need to push these heifers a little bit without hopefully compromising body condition too much. So if she just had a very small calf, he's not going to grow that much just because he's behind that growth curve already, right? If, say, your average birth weights are 70 pounds and he's 50 pounds, he's not going to catch that 20 pounds up very quickly, and particularly on a heifer that's not probably milking at her peak. And so if you're not happy with the pair, I would go ahead and maybe send her down the road. But if you know she's out of a potentially good cow, again, this is where knowing the background of these heifers is important. She might be worth keeping to see if she'll rebreed. But certainly if she's open, then she needs to go because she's not really going to contribute productivity to your herd.
Right. And so in that same scenario, well, not same, but, you know, if you have your replacement heifers, they don't get bred the first time, you know, do you keep them another round or do you just ship them? Because you already have a lot of investment in them. And
Yeah.
maybe it was because of the size or they just didn't reach puberty at that time. Do you give them a second chance or, you know, it's just a one-shot kind of thing?
Well, and so when I said set kind of a stricter breeding season, that should give them at least 2 cycles to get pregnant. A lot of systems will have a 90-day breeding system that would give her 3 or 4 chances to get pregnant. And in my mind, if they're not getting pregnant after 2 chances, then that's suspect unless they're thin. And if drought kind of kicked in and they got thin on you, then yeah, we might be a little more lax in that decision because then you have the issue of having to replace them, right? So if they lost condition because of drought, which is unavoidable, particularly in our part of the world, I would give them another chance, I think. But if they came in good flesh, and they were able to maintain it through the breeding season without issue, and they come up open, then I would say there's something up. They're not very fertile.
Okay, I got you. And you're saying earlier you can detect pregnancy as early as 45 days?
Well, really with technology now, you can do it as 20 days after exposure. The challenge with that is they're pretty much still at risk of losing that pregnancy due to stress early on. But once they hit 45 days of gestation, they've sort of committed to the job of raising that calf. So the risk of them losing a pregnancy after 45 days goes way down. And so that's the main reason. But technology can detect it as early as 20 days. The blood test can detect it at 28 days. And so you certainly could do that, but I would recommend to give the heifer a chance to settle. So that pregnancy is not going to be inhibited through just handling and stress of bringing them in and getting them checked. That's why I just said that 45 days was sort of the,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I believe we don't have any questions. Maybe I've asked them all. I have more questions, but I will email you.
Okay, that's
just
fine.
on the interest of time. But, you know, thank you again for providing another great presentation. Our viewers enjoy your presentation, and we do get a lot of feedback. And
Jesse,
thank you again, Marcy.
Jesse.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I have a question for Marcy.
Okay.
Great presentation, Marcy. Thank you. Regarding records and record keeping, I mean, you make that point over and over, and I think that's true in almost all aspects of our personal lives and business. Do you have any recommended record books that you think are more helpful to our ranchers than others that they might consider using?
So the National Cattlemen's Beef Association puts out, the nickname of it is Red Book.
Okay.
the integrated resource management book. And that's very low tech, right? That's just a little 3x4, fits in your pocket. And it has calving dates, body condition, just a whole host of information already organized for you. And so that's a really nice reference for people to keep around in their pockets. There's several apps that you can follow: body condition, breeding, if you're going to do artificial insemination, that kind of thing, weaning weights. So there's apps out there, and there's also software, but the Red Book seemed to be pretty popular.
Okay. Would it be possible for you to forward to us maybe some links to these resources that we might then put on our website for future use?
So we use one at Tucumcari called Cattle Max. It's a software program that I like really well. It's pretty user friendly. A lot of seed stock guys, purebred guys, like them because they can track registration, sales, all that. But it's also can be applicable to commercial guys.
Great. Well, that's very helpful. And we will post those and try to let folks know that they're available.
Okay.
So,
sounds
thank
good.
you.
Yes, you bet. And if I'm not sure how you guys get your Red Books now. I used to distribute them mainly through RiotPap up there, but I just got requests for orders this year that we put in. So if you guys want some up there, just let me know. They run with sponsorship dollars, we're able to keep the books around $4.50, $5, something like that.
Okay, that's very reasonable. Well, you might be hearing from us in that regard.
Okay.
Again, thank you.
You bet. I enjoy doing these, so anytime.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Marcy, again. Okay, so if you guys get a chance, visit our Facebook page to view very useful USDA program information. We also have some gardening, livestock publications, and then also some how-to videos on there. We also distribute monthly newsletters. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletters, please provide your email addresses in the survey at the end of the session. So thank you for joining us today. Don't forget the survey, and please continue to be safe and wear your mask. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone, and thank you again. Okay, so the Native American Producer Success Project, or NAPS project in short, is a collaborative effort between Dene Inc., a nonprofit organization, the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Services, and Dene College Land Grant Office. This project is being funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement, Outreach, and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. The NAPS project field staff consists of myself, our assistant, Jesse Jim, and our assistant coordinator, Sharon Sandman, and our technology media coordinator, Jana Johnson. The overall goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers. To help us achieve these goals, there are some activities that we are currently providing in 4 key areas, which include improving Navajo farm and ranch operations through a series of workshops focusing on crop-related topics and livestock-related topics. We are also increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Services, Dene College Land Grant Office, and other professionals. We are also strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo farmer and rancher Congress to address the current and future needs to Navajo farmers and ranchers. So if you are interested in being part of the Congress, please contact us. And last but not least, we are facilitating Navajo farmers and ranchers' use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, and RMA programs. We will move on to